It started with a single message, one that burned into my mind like acid on skin. A picture of her sprawled across another man's bed, grinning, with a smug caption that read, "Some people trust, some people don't." My stomach twisted, my chest tightened, and for the first time since I'd known her, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage, I was fighting for my own dignity. When people talk about relationships, they always mention trust. They say without it, love cannot survive. I used to believe that, too. But what no one warns you about is how easily trust can be weaponized. How the very thing you built your foundation on can be twisted, used against you, and turned into a rope that slowly strangles you while you convince yourself it's just a phase. That's what it felt like with her. The first time she mentioned him, it was casual. Just a friend, someone she clicked with. I didn't think much of it at the time. I believed her, because that's what you do when you love someone you believe. But over time, his name popped up more often. She would laugh at something he said, text him late into the night, cancel plans with me because he's having a rough day and needs someone to talk to. It gnawed at me, but I swallowed it down. I kept telling myself not to be paranoid. That's what she'd say whenever I voiced my unease. "Stop being paranoid." And the way she'd say it with that annoyed sigh, that eye roll that made me feel like a child had shut me down. Until that night. I was sitting at the table, scrolling through my phone when she walked in, tossing her hair back like she was making some kind of announcement. "I'm staying over at his place tonight." Just like that. No hesitation. No explanation. Just a statement, like she was telling me what she planned to have for dinner. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking. But her face was serious, impatient even, as if she was already annoyed by the objection she assumed was coming. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "He's having a movie night. A bunch of us are going. I don't want to drive back late." "What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said carefully, "is that you're married, and you don't sleep over at another man's house." She groaned dramatically, like I'd just told her she couldn't go to prom. "It's not like that. You're so selfish sometimes. It's just a friend." The word selfish hit me harder than I expected. Selfish. For asking her not to spend the night in another man's bed? I tried to stay calm. "I'm not telling you not to see your friends. I'm saying it's inappropriate to sleep over. Do you not see how that looks?" "You're ridiculous," she snapped, grabbing a bag and shoving a few things into it. "You want to control me. You don't trust me, and that's your issue, not mine." My chest tightened. This wasn't about control. It was about respect. About boundaries. But she refused to see it. And before I could say anything else, she was gone. Hours later, my phone buzzed. I remember the exact moment, the way the room was silent, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark. I picked it up, expecting maybe an apology, maybe even just a casual check-in. But it wasn't that. It was the picture. Her, sprawled on his bed like she owned the place, grinning at the camera. Him in the background, shirtless, deliberately angled so I couldn't miss it. The caption read, "Some people trust, some people don't." My stomach dropped. My hand shook. It wasn't just a photo. It was a statement. A dare. A slap across the face. For a long moment, I just stared. Then I called her. She answered, her tone light, almost playful. "What's up?" "You sent me a picture," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "Do you think that's funny?" Before I could say anything else, I heard voices in the background. Laughter. She wasn't alone. Then she said, "Hold on." And suddenly, I realized I was on speaker. "Guys," she said loudly, "listen to this. He's freaking out because I'm here." More laughter. Snickering. I could almost picture their smug faces, feeding off my humiliation. My jaw clenched. "Take me off speaker." But she ignored me. Instead, she mocked me, her voice dripping with scorn. "Get over yourself or get lost." The group erupted into laughter again. In that moment, I felt something break inside me. Not my love, not my heart that had been cracking for a while. No, what broke was the illusion that we were equals in this relationship. Because she wasn't just disrespecting me. She was performing my humiliation for an audience. Later that night, after the call ended, I sat staring at my phone when another notification appeared. This time, from one of her friends. "If you want to date someone like her, grow a backbone. Stop being so clingy." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. So now even her friends felt bold enough to step in, to taunt me, to belittle me. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. When she finally came home the next day, she strolled in like nothing had happened. No apology. No guilt. Just arrogance dripping from every step. She dropped her bag on the floor and looked at me like she was the one in control. "I'm giving you one last chance," she said firmly. "You need to chill out. Stop making everything a big deal, or this isn't going to work." My blood boiled, but I kept my face calm. "One last chance?" I repeated. She smirked. "Exactly." And in that moment, she thought she'd won. She thought she'd put me in my place, that I was so desperate to keep her that I'd swallow any amount of disrespect. But she didn't see what I saw. She didn't see the storm gathering behind my calm expression. She didn't see the way her words had lit a fire in me, one that wasn't going to burn out. And she had no idea that the shock of her life was coming. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me, her breathing slow and steady. I wondered if she felt triumphant, if she thought she'd broken me. But she hadn't. What she had done was awaken a part of me I didn't even know existed. A colder part. A sharper part. I realized I couldn't stop her from betraying me. I couldn't control her choices. But what I could control was my response. And I wasn't going to respond with anger. I was going to respond with something far more powerful. Patience. Planning. Precision. Over the next few days, I played my part well. I didn't argue. I didn't question her when she went out. I didn't flinch when she texted late at night. Instead, I smiled. I nodded. I made her believe I had finally chilled out. And the more I acted calm, the bolder she became. She stayed out later. She spent more time with him. She flaunted her independence like it was some badge of honor. What she didn't realize was that every move she made was fuel for the fire I was building. Because while she was busy mocking me, I was quietly preparing for the day she'd realize just how wrong she'd been. Looking back, that first selfie was the spark. The FaceTime call was the gasoline. And her smug, last chance, was the match. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she held all the power. But she forgot one thing. Every storm looks calm before it hits. And when mine finally broke, she was going to wish she had never underestimated me. Because she was about to get the shock of her life. There's a strange kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind where every sound feels amplified, every tick of the clock, every creak of the floorboards, every shallow breath beside me in bed. That was my world after that night. She slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the tornado she had unleashed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning not with rage anymore, but with clarity. I realized then that there were two versions of me, the man who begged for respect, and the man who demanded it without saying a word. The first version had died the moment she put me on speakerphone and let her friends laugh at me. What she didn't know was that the second version, the colder, sharper one, was already awake. and that man wasn't going to tolerate humiliation. In the days that followed, I wore a mask. A convincing one. She'd test me, waiting for me to react. She'd drop hints about spending more time with him, or casually mention a funny story he told her. Each time, she'd glance at me, searching for a flicker of jealousy, for the insecure outburst she had grown so used to. But I gave her nothing. I smiled. I nodded. I even chuckled sometimes, like I found it all harmless. And slowly, I saw the shift in her. At first, she was cautious, almost suspicious of my calmness. But as days turned into weeks, her confidence grew. She started staying out later, coming home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine, spending more time glued to her phone, fingers tapping away furiously at messages I wasn't meant to see. She thought she was free. She thought she had me where she wanted Medical, broken, desperate to hold on to her. But the truth was, I was watching, studying, learning every detail, every crack in her armor. Because revenge isn't about striking fast. It's about striking smart. I began pulling back, but not in ways she could accuse me of. I didn't stop doing things for her. I didn't start fights. Instead, I withdrew the one thing she thrived on, my attention. When she told me about her day, I listened politely but never dug deeper. When she dressed up for a night out, I told her she looked nice but never lingered. When she rolled her eyes at me, expecting me to argue, I simply shrugged and walked away. At first, it confused her. I could see it in her eyes, the irritation when I didn't play my role. Then came the frustration, the little jabs to provoke me. "You finally stopped being so clingy," she said one night with a smirk, slipping her heels on before heading out. I smiled faintly. "Guess I learned to chill." She laughed, satisfied, and walked out the door. If only she knew the storm brewing behind that calm. One thing about betrayal, it reveals people. Once someone crosses that line, they don't stop. They push further, testing how much they can get away with. And that's exactly what she did. She started flaunting it. Not outright, not in ways that could be proven, but in subtle digs and carefully chosen words. Like the night she came home late, her makeup smudged, her hair tangled. I asked, "Good night?" And she smirked. "The best." I nodded, hiding the twist in my stomach. Or the day she left her phone face down on the table while she showered, the screen lighting up with his name over and over again. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew. Every move she made was a confession without words. And I stored every single one away, building my case brick by brick. The more she thought she had me under control, the bolder she became. One evening, she sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, smirking to herself. "What's so funny?" I asked casually. "Nothing you'd get," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. I let it slide. Later that night, she looked at me and said, almost mockingly, "You know, not every woman would put up with a man as jealous as you. You're lucky I've been patient." I almost laughed at that. Patient. That was her word for betrayal. But instead of responding, I just smiled faintly. "You're right." She tilted her head, confused for a moment, then shrugged, assuming she'd won again. If only she knew that every arrogant word, every smug look, was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. I started noticing patterns. She'd leave the house at the same times. She'd always be busy during certain evenings. She guarded her phone like it was a weapon. And I realized something important. She was predictable. Predictability is dangerous for someone like her, because it makes planning easier. I could anticipate her moves, her lies, her excuses. And the more predictable she became, the more control I had. It was like watching a game where the opponent thought they were winning, but didn't realize the rules had already changed. One night, I decided to test just how blind she'd become. She told me she was going out with friends. I nodded, wished her fun, and stayed home. An hour later, I sent her a message. Hope you're having a good time. No reply. Another hour passed. Still nothing. Finally, 3 hours later, she responded. Yeah, it's fine. Don't wait up. I smiled at the screen. She thought she was covering her tracks. But I knew. And more importantly, I now knew she thought I'd stopped caring enough to notice. That was her fatal mistake. Every betrayal adds weight to the scale. And eventually, that scale tips. For weeks, I carried the weight. Every smirk, every late night, every mocking comment. I let it pile up, burying my anger beneath layers of silence. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone, the rage boiled. I'd replay the FaceTime call in my mind, hearing her laugh as her friends mocked me. I'd see the picture of her on his bed, that smug caption taunting me. And I'd remind myself of one thing. I wasn't going to let this end with me as the fool. She thought she was writing the story of our downfall. But she was wrong. I was writing it. And she was just playing her part. It didn't take long for her to notice the shift. One night, she came home late and tried to start an argument, throwing barbs at me, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I just looked at her and said calmly, "You're right." Her brows furrowed. "About what?" "Everything," I said. And I walked away, leaving her speechless. After that, she started watching me more closely. I could feel her eyes on me when I didn't react, when I didn't ask questions, when I didn't flinch. She was starting to realize that the game wasn't as fun when I wasn't playing. But by then, it was too late. The cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks anymore, they were fault lines, deep and jagged, ready to split everything apart. She thought she was winning. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger, too scared to lose her. But what she didn't realize was that I had already stopped seeing her as my wife. To me, she was already gone. And soon, she was going to see just how wrong she had been about me. Because my silence wasn't weakness. It was the calm before the storm. And when the storm hit, it would leave nothing standing. There's only so much a man can take before something inside him changes permanently. For me, that moment came on a quiet afternoon when she sat across the table, texting furiously with a smile plastered on her face. I asked her a simple question, something mundane, what she wanted for dinner. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me, didn't even grunt in response. But when her phone buzzed again and she laughed softly, that was it. That was the exact second the switch flipped. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot, messy, uncontrollable. What I felt instead was cold, calculated, final. She had mocked me, humiliated me, walked all over the vows we made. But soon, she would understand that actions have consequences. And I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to dismantle her entire facade piece by piece until she had nothing left. The beauty of revenge is in patience. I couldn't just explode and walk out. That would give her the satisfaction of believing she had broken me. I needed her to believe I was still under her spell, still trying to chill out, like she demanded. So I wore my mask better than ever. I complimented her outfits when she went out. I laughed at her stories, even when I knew they weren't meant for me. I sat at the table with her, nodding along as she scrolled through her phone, pretending not to notice how often his name lit up the screen. And she bought it. She thought I had finally accepted my role, the quiet, compliant husband who was too scared to lose her. But behind that mask, I was working, watching, collecting. One of the first things I did was start documenting. Every late-night return, every suspicious message notification, every slip of her tongue when she talked about where she'd been. I didn't snoop through her phone, I didn't need to. She was careless, arrogant. She left enough breadcrumbs in plain sight, confident I'd never dare question her again. I started a private log on my computer, writing down dates, times, details. If she came home at 2 a.m. smelling of cologne, I wrote it down. If she made a joke about how fun her friend's place was, I logged it. Piece by piece, I was building a record, a map of her betrayal. And every entry fueled the storm inside me. One night, she came home drunk. Not the tipsy, giggly kind of drunk, but sloppy, careless. She stumbled through the door, tossed her heels on the floor, and collapsed onto the couch. I brought her a glass of water, set it down in front of her, and just watched. She laughed to herself, her phone slipping out of her hand. The screen lit up. And there it was, his name, with a preview of the message. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it." I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. That one glimpse was enough to confirm what I already knew. She mumbled something incoherent and passed out on the couch. I stood over her for a long time, staring. Not at her, but at what she represented: arrogance, betrayal, disrespect. That was the night I decided my revenge wasn't just necessary. It was inevitable. The next morning, she woke up groggy and irritable, complaining about a headache. I cooked her breakfast, smiled, made coffee just the way she liked it. "You're being sweet," she said, eyeing me suspiciously. "Just trying to keep the peace," I replied. She smirked. "Finally learning." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, because what she thought was me learning was actually me lulling her deeper into complacency. The calmer I seemed, the less she suspected. And the less she suspected, the more reckless she became. Over the next few weeks, her behavior reached new heights. She stopped hiding her nights out. She stopped pretending her friendship was innocent. She'd dress up, announce she was heading to his place, and wait for me to protest. When I didn't, she seemed almost disappointed. But then she'd smirk and leave, convinced she had finally tamed me. The irony was almost laughable. She thought my silence was weakness, when in reality it was power. The quieter I became, the louder her betrayal grew. And the louder it grew, the more ammunition I had. The final straw wasn't even dramatic. It wasn't a screaming match or a shocking discovery. It was a Tuesday night. She walked in late, tossed her bag on the counter, and looked at me with that smug expression I had grown to despise. "Don't wait up next time," she said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Something in me snapped, not with rage, but with certainty. I realized I was done pretending this was salvageable. I was done being the man she mocked. But most importantly, I realized I didn't just want to walk away. I wanted her to feel what I had felt. The humiliation. The helplessness. The sting of realizing the person you trusted most had been playing you for a fool. And I knew exactly how to give that to her. I started small, subtle. I went out more often, telling her I was meeting a friend or working late. She barely reacted, too wrapped up in her own escapades to question me. I shifted money quietly, setting things aside where she couldn't touch them. She didn't notice, too busy spending on herself, on her outings, on whatever little thrill she thought made her untouchable. I reconnected with people I hadn't spoken to in a while: friends, colleagues, allies who knew me well enough to see past the mask. Slowly, I began weaving a safety net, one she didn't even know existed. All the while, I kept my mask firmly in place. Sweet, quiet, agreeable. The perfect husband who had learned to chill. And she bought it. Every single time. One evening, she decided to push me again. We were sitting on the couch when she looked at me, smirking, and said, "You know, I could have any man I want. You should be grateful I even chose you." The words were a knife to the gut, but I didn't flinch. I smiled faintly, nodding. "You're right," I said softly. She laughed, leaning back against the cushions, satisfied with her little victory. What she didn't realize was that in that moment, her words cemented my resolve. Because when the time came, she wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything she thought made her powerful. By the end of those weeks, the mask I wore was second nature. She thought I was beaten, tamed, molded into the submissive husband she could control. But beneath the mask, the storm was ready. The breaking point had come and gone. Now, all that remained was execution. And soon, she was going to learn the hardest truth of all. When you mock a man's dignity, when you spit on his loyalty, when you treat his silence as weakness, you don't just lose him. You awaken the part of him that will make sure you regret every choice you made. And her regret was coming, faster than she could ever imagine. There's a peculiar satisfaction when a plan you've nurtured finally leaves your hands. It's equal parts relief and dread, relief because the waiting is over, dread because once you pull the string, everything moves, and you have to live with the consequences. I had rehearsed this night in my head 1,000 times. Now, it was finally here. She came home later than usual, laughter still echoing at the fringes of her voice, perfume strong enough to prick at memories. She tossed her keys on the console, snapped her fingers at the cat to move, and dropped herself onto the couch in a way that said she owned the place. She thought she did. I greeted her like every other evening for months, with a soft smile, a casual question about her night, and the same empty compliment I'd used so often she'd stopped hearing it. "You okay?" I asked, careful and light. She snorted. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" "Good." I kept my voice even. "I'm heading out for a bit. I'll be back before midnight." She raised an eyebrow, suspicious for once. "Where?" "Just walking." "Needed air." I kissed her forehead. "Don't wait up." She laughed, which meant she believed me. And that laugh was a bell. I stepped into the night with the mask on and the plan in my pocket. The groundwork had been meticulous. Months of silent harvesting, the logbook, the careless messages she left within view, the night she stumbled in, and the cologne she couldn't hide. I'd converted that evidence into actions that, when timed correctly, would be damning, not because they were dramatic, but because they were undeniable and public. I'd reconnected with people I'd let drift away, a co-worker who owed me a favor, an old friend who still had a foot in the same social circle she flaunted, the bar owner who remembered the faces who came and went. I didn't ask them to do anything illegal or violent. I asked for small things: presence, corroboration, the willingness to be in the right place at the right time. They didn't need to know the whole story. People who owe you one favor tend to show up when you need them. And then there was the one piece I'd held back until the final act, the recorded call. I'd never wanted blackmail or violence. What I wanted was truth exposed on her terms, the truth made social, immediate, and impossible to rationalize away. So I'd found a way to make her words public. A week earlier, she'd texted me, pretending to be concerned about our life, laughing about how unfairly I treated her in front of her friends. She liked to test lines, to see what would stick. On a dare to prove her point, she called me in front of them and let me speak. But on my end, a small, legal device recorded that entire call. I hadn't used it maliciously. I had used it to preserve the reality she had created with her own voice. That recording, paired with the stack of dates, times, the photos she'd sent while bragging, and the witness statements I'd quietly gathered, formed an airtight constellation. All I had to do was set the stage. I started where social currency lived, their group chat. She and her friends were loud online, theatrical, quick to rally around each other when someone needed a laugh. They were also careless. Proud people don't always think before they type. Over a month, I had sown small seeds in that space, the occasional meme sent from a burner account, a throwaway comment about how people who mock partners often have something to hide. I'd watch them bite, watch the thread swell in predictable patterns of outrage and mockery. I didn't take over the conversation, I nudged it. People hate feeling foolish publicly. They hate even more being part of a pack that's shown to be cruel. On the night I chose, I sent 3 messages from that burner account innocuous, pointed. A screenshot of her selfie from months ago, uploaded with a caption that simply read, "This one always gets me." Another, a cropped photo of the two of them in a bar, her arm looped around his shoulder, taken from a distance at a time she said she was home. No accusation. Just evidence. It didn't explode immediately, but once it landed, enough of her friends engaged, the momentum built. Comments poured in supportive, shocked, incredulous. A few of them reached out to me privately, asking if I was alright, if I'd seen the posts. My burner kept the distance necessary so that when the chorus started, it sounded like a natural uproar, not orchestrated revenge. That uproar was stage 1, shame applied socially. For the second part, I needed her to feel the gaze beyond a phone screen. I arranged a small thing, a casual dinner with people she respected, people who had influence in the circle she frequented. I told her it was a reconciliation dinner, let's see each other's point of view sort of thing. She loved the theater of public appeasing. She'd take the stage without a second thought. The restaurant was a choice neutral, mid-priced, the kind of place where people went to be seen, not where they were photographed by strangers. I invited 3 people, an old friend of hers, who still held sway among her peers, the bartender who'd become a confidant, and another husband of a mutual acquaintance, someone I'd discreetly tipped off a week earlier. They arrived minutes apart and sat where I'd asked, making it seem spontaneous. She appeared radiant in her confidence, too practiced in deflection to suspect an ambush. We sat. We ordered. Small talk bloomed. It was the kind of scene I'd been part of for years. Lacquered smiles, safe topics, laughter tailored to fill the silences. Halfway through the main course, the old friend asked, with nothing but curiosity in her tone, "So remember that night you said you weren't home? Someone posted a photo that places you somewhere else." The laugh on her face went thin. She shrugged, offhand, but then the bartender, the man I'd nudged earlier, leaned in and asked about the photo's timestamp. His phone screen glowed briefly. The public post I'd seeded into the group chat. She fumbled. She tried to be clever, to turn their suspicion into an accusation of stalking. But everywhere she turned, the small network I'd assembled had corroboration. Someone had seen her. Someone had a timestamp. Someone had a memory that didn't match her story. She left the table composed, but there was a tremor in the set of her fingers. The social facade had cracks now, and they showed in the way people looked at her. Public embarrassment is one thing. The betrayal I wanted her to feel was personal. The group dinner had reopened wounds, but I still needed the final, inescapable proof. That came with the recording. In a room where she'd expected allies, I played it. I didn't do anything dramatic. The friends' voices were low, the clatter of cutlery a mundane soundtrack. After she left the table with an excuse to freshen up, I cleared my throat, called everyone's attention, and said, "I've got something that explains a lot." I had prepared the playback on my phone, and I asked the bartender, who'd become my conspirator in this, to hook it up to the speakers under the guise of playing music. The first line of the recording that played out loud was benign laughter, irrelevant until her voice cut in, lucid and mocking, referencing the FaceTime call, the way she'd invited humiliation and celebrated it. I watched her face in the reflection of a nearby window as the words came out of the speaker. The laughter, the derision, the phrase she used about getting what I deserved, which she'd said to her friends and never meant for me to hear at such volume. She came back mid-playback, the color chased out of her face. Somewhere inside the low hum of the restaurant, the recording made what had been private undeniably public. People around pretended not to listen, but the people who mattered did. The ones whose opinion she valued. The ones who would now whisper. She wanted humiliation as sport. Now, the sport had turned on her. I have never taken pleasure in petty theft or humiliation for humiliation's sake. My revenge was not about making her poor. It was about making her see how quickly the support structure she'd been leaning on could erode when trust evaporated. I'd quietly begun shifting resources prior to this night, small transfers, hidden accounts, a reserve meant for emergencies. I made sure the lines she counted on to pay for nights she didn't remember were slightly out of sync. Credit cards that had been in her name were flagged by me through legitimate channels. Fraud alerts I'd reported earlier to give the appearance of financial instability. It was surgical, not criminal. I used existing systems, triggers that made banks call and accounts freeze for suspicious activity. When her expense notifications bounced back or a payment was delayed, it became another public sign that something was off. The social humiliation metamorphosed into practical consequences: late fees, awkward calls from service providers, friends who offered help and then subtly withdrew invitations. She cursed me under her breath when she discovered the first missed payment. She blamed the bank. She cursed me more loudly when the second notice arrived. I let her rage, let her rustle for allies. I watched her scramble and saw the first threads of panic. The final act was always going to be a confrontation, but not the kind that satisfied a screenplay. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted clarity. I wanted her to know, without doubt, that the man she thought she'd broken had chosen to stop being a victim. A week after the dinner, when the group chat had turned from defense to gossip to disgust, I sat her down in the living room. The house smelled faintly of the jasmine she liked. The cat twined around our legs like it had always done. "I'm done playing passive," I said, as gently as I could. "You humiliated me. You made a spectacle of our life. You weren't honest. I told myself to be better than the man I saw in me that night you put me on speaker. I kept that promise." She scoffed. "You're dramatic." "No." I opened my laptop and set the recorder's file to play. Her face went still as the words filled our home, the laughter, the braggadocio, the way she'd bragged about making me look small. "I think you should go," I said when it finished. My voice didn't break. There was no triumph in it, only the flatness of someone delivering a verdict. "Leave. Take what you need. We'll sort the rest." She blinked. The first real thing she'd said in months. "You can't do this." "I already did," I said. She accused, begged, threatened to tell stories. I listened. I answered only once more, quietly and clearly. "This is the result of choices you made. I won't be your punchline anymore." They say revenge rarely heals. That's true. The act of exposing her took away the power she'd wielded, but it also took a strip of me. Satisfaction came, yes, but it was mixed with a hollowness I hadn't expected. The quiet after the storm felt bigger than the quiet before. Rooms seemed different. The cat didn't understand why the air had changed. Friends I'd prodded to attend the dinner sent apologetic messages that read like condolence notes. People took sides like fences were the only safe places to stand. She left that night with a bag, eyes dry and furious. Outside, the city's indifferent lights shone on her silhouette as she hailed a cab. She did not cry. She was too proud to show that to the world she'd once impressed. Pride makes for a hard landing. Inside the house, the evidence I'd assembled sat where I'd left it. Logs, screenshots, recordings. They felt weighty in a way I hadn't expected, like a ledger of consequence. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Sleep was restless. My mind replayed her face at the restaurant, The slow realization that others recognized her behavior, the way people corrected their gaze when their opinion of her shifted. I felt strangely bereft, not because I had lost what we once were, but because the person I had been trying so hard to save didn't exist anymore. In the morning, the silence of the house was the first thing to greet me. No clatter of heels. No late-night messages. No smug posts on social media. The absence was deafening in its normality. Messages came from friends in the hours that followed, thin and polite. A few asked if I was okay. Some congratulated me, though their congratulations felt like barbs wrapped in velvet. One person I'd expected to be neutral blocked me after seeing the recording. Another privately admitted relief that I'd acted. I realized the cost: respect from some, disdain from others, and a life rearranged by a single decision. Revenge had restored a kind of personal agency, but it also drew a line through the community we'd shared. Some people I'd laughed with for years shifted to the other side of the street. That had been inevitable. When you pull back a curtain, you must be prepared for the faces that look out. As the days blurred into weeks, I found myself revisiting motives and outcomes. Had I gone too far? Had I chosen public spectacle over quieter dignity? The recording had laid bare the truth, yes, but it had also opened a wound, mine and hers. I had wanted her to feel the humiliation I had swallowed. Instead, I'd also given her a way to be defined by it forever. There were nights when I heard nothing, the house hollow, the cat curling in my lap like judgment. I'd stare at the window and see the city moving on, indifferent. I had my dignity back. The smug laughter no longer haunted me. But sometimes dignity feels like an empty room where conversation used to be. I didn't regret the principle of my actions. I regretted the collateral the friends lost, the casual cruelty of the social media rumors, the way strangers now whispered. Revenge is not a clean operation. It scatters fragments that never fully reassemble. This is where the execution ends and the reckoning begins. She'd left, the public had seen, and I had my truth. The next part of the story wasn't about exposing or shaming. It would be about consequence in different forms: legal, social, personal. It would be about whether restoration was possible, whether the life I built anew would be any less lonely or perhaps more honest. As I sat in the quiet house, watching the sun make a slow pass across the walls, I realized vengeance was only the middle of the story. The end would be something else entirely. For now, the shock I promised her had arrived. She had been unmade in the arena she lived for. The question that remained, the question that would haunt both of us as the dust settled, was what we would build from the ruin. Because even when the execution is flawless, aftermath is messy. Even when the mask comes off, you must live in the face that looks back at you. And the hardest part, I was learning, wasn't to make her suffer. It was to wake up in the morning and reconcile the man who planned it with the man who still wanted something real. When the storm finally ends, the silence that follows doesn't feel like peace. It feels like ringing in your ears after an explosion, the faint reminder of destruction that still lingers. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. No clatter of heels. No sarcastic voice echoing through the hallway. Just me, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the cat who looked at me as though asking where she'd gone. I thought I'd feel victorious. I thought I'd sit on the couch, pour myself a drink, and savor the taste of revenge like a fine whiskey. But instead, I sat staring at the wall, replaying everything in my head, each scene sharper than the last. The selfie. The laughter. The call on speaker. The dinner. The recording. I had done it. I had taken back my power. She had been exposed, stripped of her mask, left with nothing but the raw truth of her choices. So why did the silence feel heavier than before? News spreads faster than fire in dry grass. What I'd exposed didn't stay contained to her little circle of friends or even the restaurant crowd. Screenshots circulated. Voices carried. Suddenly, people I barely knew were sending me messages, some filled with sympathy, others with thinly veiled curiosity. One man I hadn't spoken to in years texted, "Saw the posts. Damn. Proud of you for standing up for yourself." Another wrote, "Tough break, man. But maybe you shouldn't have made it so public." That second one stung, because I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Her humiliation was now community property. People dissected it over drinks, whispered about it at work, traded versions of the story like currency. She had always thrived on attention. Now it became her executioner. And though I'd orchestrated it, the aftermath didn't belong to me. It belonged to the gossip machine, and once it started, I had no control over where it went. 3 nights after she left, I received a message from her. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt at reconciliation. It was pure venom. "You think you've won? You've just made yourself look pathetic. Everyone's laughing at you more than me." I read it twice, then 3 times. The old me would have responded, would have defended myself, would have tried to argue the facts. But now, I simply deleted it. Because the truth was, it didn't matter who was laughing. It didn't matter who whispered what. I hadn't done this for them. I hadn't done this for her. I'd done it for me, for the man who had sat in that kitchen months ago, begging his wife not to stay the night at another man's house. For the man who had been mocked, humiliated, and told to get over it or get lost. She could spew all the poison she wanted. The damage was already done, and not to me. What surprised me most wasn't who abandoned me, it was who stood by me. An old coworker, someone I thought barely tolerated me, called and said, "Saw what happened. Just wanted to say, you did what a lot of us wish we had the guts to do." Another, a mutual friend, who had been closer to her than me, confessed, "Honestly, I always suspected something, but I didn't want to get in the middle. Still, good on you for showing the truth." It was strange, hearing validation from people I never expected support from. It made me realize something. While she had mocked me as weak, others saw strength in what I'd done. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as the silence made me feel. Of course, no story like this ends cleanly. There were practical consequences. Divorce papers had to be drawn. Assets had to be split. Accounts had to be unfrozen. When we sat across from each other at the lawyer's office, it was the first time I'd seen her since the night I told her to leave. She didn't look broken. She didn't look humbled. She looked angry. But behind the anger, there was something else. Fear. Because for the first time, she wasn't the one controlling the narrative. She tried to play victim, claiming I had set her up, that I had humiliated her on purpose. The lawyer listened, scribbled notes, and then calmly said, "Your actions created the evidence. He didn't fabricate anything." The silence that followed was sweet. The legal process was slow, messy, exhausting, but it was also cleansing. Each form signed, each meeting endured, was another brick removed from the crumbling wall that had kept me chained to her. You don't celebrate victories like these with parties or champagne. You celebrate them quietly, in small moments that almost feel too insignificant to matter. The first time, I woke up and realized I didn't have to wonder where she was. The first dinner I cooked for myself without waiting for her to come home. The first evening I sat on the porch with a beer, listening to the crickets, and felt no dread about an argument looming. These were my victories. Small, quiet, unglamorous. But they were mine. But let me be honest. Revenge is satisfying, yes. But it isn't pure. It isn't clean. It comes with shadows. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I could have ended it differently. If I could have walked away quietly, kept my dignity without dragging her through the mud. If I had let her lies crumble on their own instead of accelerating their collapse. Maybe. But then I remembered the sound of her laughter on that call. The way her friends cackled while I was on speaker. The way she mocked me for simply expecting respect. And every time I remembered that, the regret burned a little less. Some scars are worth carrying if they remind you never to accept less than you deserve. Over time, something strange happened. The silence that once felt suffocating began to feel like freedom. I redecorated the house. Nothing drastic, just enough to make it mine again. A new couch. A fresh coat of paint in the bedroom. Pictures of places I wanted to visit, not places we had been. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned. Reading late into the night, jogging in the early mornings, even cooking dishes I had always wanted to try but never had time for because I was too busy chasing after her whims. Little by little, I rediscovered the man I had been before her shadow stretched over me. And in that rediscovery, I found something better than revenge. I found myself. I didn't keep tabs on her. I didn't stalk her social media. But news has a way of reaching you whether you ask for it or not. Friends whispered that her circle had grown smaller. Some had distanced themselves after the dinner. Others had turned on her completely when the financial mess caught up. Apparently, the man she had once flaunted moved on quickly, leaving her without the safety net she thought she had. I didn't smile when I heard it. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded and let the words pass through me. Because by then, her downfall no longer mattered to me. I had already moved on in ways she never expected. Closure isn't a single moment. It's not a dramatic finale where the villain is defeated and the hero rides off into the sunset. Closure is gradual. It's the slow realization that the weight is gone, that the anger has cooled, that you can think of the person who hurt you without your chest tightening. For me, closure came one morning when I woke up, poured myself a cup of coffee, and realized I hadn't thought about her once the day before. Not her laughter, not her betrayal, not her downfall. Nothing. She had finally stopped occupying space in my mind. That was the real victory. Looking back, I don't regret exposing her. I don't regret the recording, the dinner, the financial nudges. Every piece of it was necessary to remind me of one thing. I deserved respect. I deserved honesty. And if I wasn't going to get it from her, then I was going to reclaim it for myself. But the most important lesson I learned wasn't about her. It was about me. I learned that silence isn't weakness, that patience isn't cowardice, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait, gather, and strike when the time is right. And I learned that revenge, while satisfying, is only a doorway. Beyond it lies something far more powerful, the freedom to live without fear, without humiliation, without the constant weight of someone else's choices. People still ask me sometimes if I'd ever take her back, if I'd forgive her. My answer is always the same. Forgiveness is possible, but reconciliation is not. Some things, once broken, can't be rebuilt. And honestly, I don't want to rebuild it. Because the man I am now, the man who sits in his own home, drinks his coffee in peace, and smiles at the quiet, is stronger, freer, and more alive than the man who once begged his wife not to spend the night at another man's house. And that is enough.